This is a strategy overview for the board game Voidfall. Voidfall is a blend of Euro and 4X, where you're balancing both your economy and military expansion to end up with the most victory points, called influence, at the end of 3 cycles. There's a lot going on in this game, so let's start with the economic part. Your economy is determined by guilds and sectors you control, represented by these cog-shaped pieces, and the population of those sectors, represented by the number on the die. Some cards let you put guilds down into a sector or increase the population in a sector. You turn the wheel to show your production capacity for each type of resource: food, power, materials, credits, and science. Credits are wild for food, power, and materials, but the max production of credits is lower than everything else. The exception is at the end of each cycle, you need to pay actual food or materials and power for upkeep. Let's look at an example few turns. Maybe you increase population, which increases your existing production. Then you place a new guild, then you produce. The production gets you more resources. In addition to all your guild resources, you have to manage your fleet power, which tracks how many ships you have available or in a given sector. Activating fleet power just moves the cubes from the left inactive pool to the right active pool. You can build shipyards and sectors, which allows you to put available fleet power from your active pool out onto your sectors for combat purposes. Let's look at a second example few turns that include combat. Let's put down a shipyard, then put a fleet power into the sector, then invade the adjacent sector. The side with more initiative, in this case just more corvettes, goes first. Then both sides trade shots until the combat's resolved. When you successfully invade a sector, you can get a glory token. You score the sum of all your glory tokens, so if you go out and invade a bunch of sectors, you can get a ton of points since you score glory tokens after each successful invasion. In this example, if I invade here and already have a 2-point glory token, I'll gain the 1-point glory token and score 3 total. Next, this is your personal player mat. There are 3 civilization tracks: society, statecraft, and economy. Going up on the tracks give you bonuses as you ascend, and going past certain thresholds allow you to get upgraded technologies. Stage 3 and 4 usually gives you a point bonus at the cost of inactivating fleet power. This is the board for the 4 basic factions, but each advanced faction has its own player mat. At the start of each cycle, you have all these cards in your hand, called focus cards. Each turn you choose a focus, then do 2 out of the 3 actions on the card. Each cycle has 4 to 6 turns, so you have to choose a subset of the cards based on your strategy. All of the focus cards have some combination of producing or spending resources, so let's take a look at each of them. Conquest. Invade or regroup, gain an agenda or move a corruption, activate 2 fleet power. I'll talk more about agendas a little later, but they help you score points. Politics. Advance on statecraft, upgrade a glory token and invade, get a trade token and move a corruption. Trade tokens are useful because they can be spent to use all 3 actions on a card instead of 1. Corruption are these markers that look like fire that represent the Voidborn's influence. Having corruption prevents you from gaining bonuses from your tracks and also increases the strength of Voidborn skirmishes, which are automated attacks against your sectors. I'll talk more about skirmishes later, but usually gaining corruption is bad. Development. Build a guild or installation. Build a guild and installation by withdrawing a fleet power. Increase population or remove a corruption. Production. Advance on the society track. Produce resources. Remove a corruption and regroup. Innovation. Produce science and credits. Gain a technology. Gain an agenda. Progress. Produce science or build a science guild. Gain technology. Remove a corruption and regroup. Prosperity. Advance on economy. Produce any resource. Gain an agenda and build an installation. Reinforcement. Advance on a track and build a sector defense. Deploy fleets. Regroup and build a sector defense. Temptation. Take an action from a preferred focus. Advance on the civilization track and peek at a galactic event. Activate and deploy fleet power and produce. The ultimate goal in the game is to maximize points, and a large part of scoring points are these cards called agendas. Agendas score at the end of each cycle, but also add a free agenda action when paired to the associated focus card. You have to gain an agenda first, then you can play it concurrently with the corresponding focus card. Notably, there's no agenda associated with the politics focus. When playing an agenda, the free action on the agenda goes into play, then you choose whether to slot the new agenda in or not. If you have 2 of the same agenda type, you pick the agenda to be in play and discard the other. For example, I can play this Augmented Armada agenda with Prosperity. Then on the next turn, I can play it if I play the Development or Production focus card. When I play Development or Production, I get a free action that lets me place a guild and produce the same type of resource. I can slot it in, and then the agenda will score 4 influence if I have multiple fleet types, and 2 influence for each reclaim token I have at the end of the cycle. The little red icons on the bottom right indicate I have to pay 2 upkeep at the end of the cycle if I have this agenda in play, so more points for a cost. Cycles are the game's checkpoints for scoring. You get a galactic event that determines the number of turns per cycle, as well as intermittent goals to work towards. Here's some example Cycle 1 galactic events. You get rewards that are sort of like free actions on focus cards, like gaining a tech or going up on a civilization track. In Cycle 2, you get the choice between a similar reward to Cycle 1 or influence. Cycle 3 rewards are purely influence, just because it's the end of the game. Here are some broad goals for each cycle. Cycle 1, identify relevant techs, establish an economic base, maybe take an additional sector if you have a good reason to expand. We want an upgraded tech in Cycle 2, so plan to go up on 1 or 2 civilization tracks that have useful rewards. Hopefully get an agenda to play, and aim to achieve the cycle goals so you get the reward. In Cycle 2, we get access to innovation. We want to upgrade techs, obtain strategic sectors, manage the crisis board, score cycle bonuses, and agendas. I'd aim to have at least 3 total agendas active by the end of this cycle, although filling all 4 would be ideal. You should have a good idea on what your strengths are by mid-cycle 2, i.e. how good are your economic and military scoring perspectives, and you should be orienting yourself towards maximizing points in Cycle 3. In Cycle 3, we're hoping to maximize agenda and cycle scoring, and hit as many objectives as possible. If we look at the crisis board for solo play, the point threshold you need to beat is determined by the difficulty as baseline, then points are added for void storms, unfilled safe havens, catastrophe tokens, harbingers left in sectors, burned tech, unfulfilled crises, fallen houses left in sectors, extant corruption, and corrupted population. Most of these objectives are addressed by clearing out sectors, with the biggest exception being filled safe havens. It's up to you on how you want to maximize your own scoring while minimizing the opponent's score. Some of the focus cards give you the option of obtaining technologies. In this next section, I'll go through all the tech and why each one is useful. I group them broadly into economic techs, and combat utility. Arc ships. This tech lets you build more guilds at home. Your home system can't be attacked, so it gives you a way to safely increase your economy without expanding. The improved version also lets you increase your home population when using the reinforcement focus. Central surveillance. When you play the politics focus, upgrade a glory token or gain an agenda. This allows for easier access to agendas and their free actions, and the upgraded glory tokens makes invading gives you more points faster. The cost is decreasing population, so taken together, this tech is good if you're invading a lot of sectors where you don't mind decreasing the population in random empty sectors. It also makes politics a better focus in general, so if your faction likes playing politics, you can use this to get a ton of points through glory tokens. The upgraded version of the tech gives you an additional agenda slot. Agendas are a crucial source of points, so you're getting more points from both agendas and glory tokens. Cloning. When you increase population, gain a credit or fleet power. I can't overstate how useful getting a ton of free fleet power is. This tech lets you upgrade your economy and can put out a bunch of fleet power out in your sectors or safe havens. The upgraded version bypasses the fleet requirements for your stage 3 and 4 tracks, which is also huge. Usually you have to choose between going up on your tracks, tying your fleet power in safe havens, or expanding on the board due to fleet power scarcity. This lets you reach the top of your tracks without dancing around deactivating or activating fleet power. Cybernetics. When you establish a guild, get 2 of the matching resource. This gives you a ton of production capacity and encourages placing new guilds. The upgraded version gives you 2 resources for every guild in your sector when you upgrade a pure population. This is incredibly good. You basically never have to worry about resource scarcity for the rest of the game, and as a byproduct will let you get a ton of points from overproducing. Data refinery. Bankers guilds increase science production. You can build a bunch of bankers guilds to use as wild resources and also increases science production. Because credits can't be used as science, this is kind of a workaround for having credits also influence your science production. Makes the innovation card much better since you produce both science and credits with the top action. The improved version allows you to use credits to pay for upkeep. The usual downside to credit production is that the maximum production level is less than the other resource types at 8 instead of 13. The other is that you actually need food or resources or power to pay for upkeep. With this tech, you can now use credits for almost everything. Decontamination chambers. All this tech does is manage corruption. but corruption is such a big part of the game that this tech is just generally very useful. Corruption on your player mat can be placed on your tracks or agenda slots. It prevents you from receiving bonuses from increasing your tracks, and also blocks scoring of corrupted agenda slots. There are full actions in the game that are just moving or removing corruption, and you get to store corruption on this card, which keeps your board clear and removes corruption for free during the evaluation phase. It also bypasses the calculation of corruption on your player board for voidborn skirmishes. The immediate actions also give you ways of dealing with corruption, so you can be more aggressive with using the temptation focus or moving corruption from sectors onto your player board. Neural Matrix. This tech produces more credits. In Cycle 1, the only way to produce credits is with a prosperity or temptation focus. Then in Cycle 2, you can use innovation to produce credits in science. The upgraded version is interesting. They're trying to improve credit production by making the production focus also produce credits, as well as doubling the amount of influence scored with bankers' guilds. The immediate effect of the improved tech is also producing credits. By tying the credit production to your production focus, you can also produce food and go up on the society track, since you still need food for upkeep. I think this tech is a little more situational. You do get more credit volume and extra points for your bankers guild, but I think this tech is best used when your faction also likes using their production focus a lot. Robotics. Double a development focus action. The actions on development are to establish a guild for material costs, recall a fleet power to establish a guild and build an installation, or increase population for a science. It makes development a better focus card by doubling its action efficiency and encourages rapid expansion of your economy. The improved version allows you to double an action on your preferred focus card, with the exception being you can't further increase development. So if your faction's preferred focus is development, then this tech is a little limited. And to my knowledge, you can't use temptation to double the action through the temptation focus. I think this improved tech is kind of crazy for factions with different preferred focuses. You could research technologies twice, or invade twice, or shoot up the civilization tracks. Purifier. The basic technology lets you pay a science to remove a corruption after you use the temptation focus. The temptation focus is very good. You can use your preferred focus, then repeat an action on that focus. The second action lets you improve a wild track, and more notably, peek at a cycle card. The third action lets you activate and deploy fleet power and produce 2 wild resources. The cost is gaining corruption, which can be annoying. Being able to consistently use the temptation focus with a reduced corruption cost can be really strong. The improved tech can double the corruption removal, and you can remove corruption from a sector when you deploy fleet power to it. The downside is that you don't actually deploy the fleet power to the sector, so I think this tech is better if you have an easy way to deploy fleet power. Terraforming. Increases population when using the development or prosperity focus as a material cost. The improved tech lets you increase population when you play the development, prosperity, or innovation focus cards for free. Just a solid economic tech, especially if you're playing factions that like using the development or prosperity focuses. Trade Nexus. This tech gives you a trade bonus when returning the trade token, either next to the trade token or any of the rewards under it. It just encourages you to use trade tokens to use the extra action. The upgraded version gives you trade tokens when you overproduce, which is so incredibly strong. Trade tokens and the additional actions are really helpful throughout the game, and getting this improved tech as soon as possible will accelerate your overall game. This section is about new ships. Sentries. These ships count as mobile sector defenses. You can deploy into sentry fleets the classic way, or when you build an installation, you can deploy into sentry fleets. The improved version lets you build both an installation and deploy a sentry fleet. Sentries deal approach damage as the defender and act as corvettes when you're the invader. Destroyers. In combat with just corvettes, you trade 1 damage in turns regardless of the number of total fleet power present. Destroyers deal damage based on total fleet power on the initial salvo, so you can invade with 2 full fleets and deal 6 damage in 1 turn, and they have an extra initiative to make sure they go first. Upgraded destroyers also deal an approach damage, so they can absolutely wreak havoc. Dreadnoughts. The main attraction from dreadnoughts are the approach and salvo absorption. You get 1 of each per fleet power, so you get a huge defensive buffer when expanding or protecting your existing sectors. Notably, you can only get salvo absorption when you're the defender. Carriers. Carriers act as mobile shipyards. So wherever there's a carrier, you can count it as being a shipyard for deployment. Additionally, During the approach step, you can automatically deploy corvettes to the sector per carrier fleet power. Another bonus, you get a salvo absorption per fleet power. The corvette deployment adds bodies into the fight, and the salvo absorption is crazy good defensively. It does cost an additional food to deploy carriers, but the benefits are worth it. This section is combat utility. Autonomous drones lets you use trade tokens for an approach and salvo absorption. This is really useful, but also dependent on how many trade tokens you're getting throughout the game. So if you get this upgrade, you'll probably be spending more actions getting trade tokens, which can be used either for combat or just to use the 3 actions on your turn. Also notable, the immediate action gives you a trade token, which is useful by itself. The upgraded version lets you automatically defend against the evaluation phase skirmish, which is actually huge. It lets you expand more aggressively without worrying about the end of cycle skirmishes. Combat replicators. When you successfully invade a sector, keep the installations. Usually you have to remove all installations and guilds, but keeping the installations can be useful since there's usually a sector defense that you can use for yourself. The upgraded version lets you deploy fleet power after you win or tie combat, and you win ties. This is incredibly useful if you're going wide and invading a bunch of sectors, since it bypasses the need to constantly reinforce through shipyards or actions. You can invade, immediately replace a fleet power, and repeat for the rest of the game. Deep space missiles. The first upgrade allows your shipyards to deal approach damage when you invade an adjacent sector. Approach damage is always incredibly useful, and being able to use it offensively is something you can only get otherwise with destroyers. The upgraded version lets you deal up to 2 approach damage in offense or defense. Your shipyards double as sector defenses, and these are coming from adjacent sectors on top of any sector defense you have in the actual sector being invaded. So it will be incredibly hard for your opponents to invade you, while you can consistently be dealing approach damage. Escape pods. This lets you recycle fleet power at your home base. The main benefit is that you don't have to spend actions reinforcing in order to deploy more fleet power. Compare this to combat replicators, where you can automatically add a fleet power to the invaded sector, whereas this tech conserves fleet power in a more defensive way since it's at your home sector. Hyperdrive lets you auto-regroup before an invasion. You're limited to invading into adjacent sectors, so there's this multi-turn process of positioning fleet power so you can have a favorable invasion. With this tech, you always regroup so you can pull fleet power from different places without worrying where your fleet power or shipyards are. The upgraded version lets you skip sectors and void storms, so you can be unpredictable and strike from anywhere. Energy cells. The basic tech lets you deal an extra approach damage. Approach damage is incredibly strong, so dealing extra makes your positions that much harder to be invaded. The upgraded version also makes sector upkeep free. Taken together, this tech encourages you to build up sectors with the maximum amount of guild and installations. Orbital docks. This doubles your fleet deployment capability. The improved tech adds 2 credit production per shipyard. This tech wants you to be making a bunch of shipyards, which lets you deploy more fleet power. Because you only have so much fleet power to deploy at any one time, you're encouraged to use this fleet power offensively to put fleet power back onto your player mat, which is then available again to deploy out into your many shipyards. The obvious bottleneck is the amount of active fleet power available, so this tech is only as good as the amount of fleet power you can activate. Salvage scanner. When you invade a sector, you get to place a reclaim token before combat begins. Notably, you don't actually have to win the combat for the reclaim token to be placed, but I guess you usually want to actually win the invasion. The improved ability of the tech always adds onto the original tech, so you get to place 2 total reclaim tokens, as well as removing the corruption when you successfully invade. Slightly random with the reclaim tokens, but the ability to just automatically get pure sectors with stuff already in it can be really strong. Starbases. These act as both a shipyard and a sector defense, and also increases the population when built. Starbases are just more action efficient, and being able to place 2 starbases with the improved technology while also removing corruption is just all around really solid. Shields. This tech gives corvettes a salvo absorption. Then with the improved tech, you get an approach and salvo absorption. The improved tech lets you have salvo absorption when attacking. Compare this to dreadnoughts, where you have to be the defender, although you can have multiple salvo absorption based on the amount of dreadnoughts in the fleet. So you can have both shields and dreadnoughts, and they work slightly differently. Tactical transports. This lets you exchange population for fleet power and vice versa, depending on the focus. Prosperity lets you recall fleet power to increase population, or you can decrease population to deploy fleet power while using the conquest focus. Tactical is an apt description because the cost of recalling fleet power or decreasing population is not small. Maybe you're going for a strong economy, so you recall a bunch of fleet power so you can increase population. Or you're invading a bunch of different sectors, so you don't really care about decreasing population in those random sectors. Maybe if your faction has a really easy way of deploying fleet power, but has a hard time increasing population, or vice versa, this would be really useful. I think this benefit is better when you can also use this tech during the faction's preferred focus, but you can't double up if the faction's preferred focus is conquest or prosperity, so probably not as good for those factions. Targeting. Increases combat initiative for corvettes. Initiative does play a role in determining the victor. Usually there's a 1 or 2 fleet power difference if your initiative is tied or less. But I don't know how universally useful this tech is. Maybe if you're facing an opponent with better ship tech like destroyers or something, but I do think there's a lot of better techs out there. The improved tech does give you an agenda, so that's useful in general. Torpedoes. Increases corvette damage. The basic tech only counts for the first salvo, and the improved tech deals 2 damage per salvo. Just a nice way to deal more damage, and in combination with the immediate effect of deploying some extra fleet power to your home system. Compare this to destroyers, which can only deal extra damage on the first step, although in destroyers it scales with fleet power. Torpedoes deal extra damage each salvo, so it's slightly different. To set up the game, you pick 4 houses at random. These 2 techs each make the 8 technologies that form the pool for that game. Every game has at least one of the following houses: Asteran, Sentries and Deep Space Missiles, Dunlork, Energy Cells and Orbital Docks, Shivius, Dreadnoughts and Decontamination Chambers, Yarvik, Hyperdrive and Tactical Transports, or Xenor, Cloning and Destroyers. I think the notable techs from each of these houses are Sentries, Orbital Docks, Dreadnoughts, Hyperdrive, and Destroyers, which ensures you always have some sort of offensive option in each game. Moving on, here are just some random concepts that I think are important for playing Voidfall. Something I've come to realize is incredibly important is fleet power economy. Understanding how well your faction activates and deploys fleet power will shape how many systems you can comfortably control, while also trying to fill safe havens. It just helps in evaluating which goals you should pursue. Managing the crisis board is a central part of the game, since if it gets out of control, the skirmishes and economic penalties will imprison your military and cripple your resources. Taking catastrophes early can be really useful early on. Even though each catastrophe does add a chunk of points against you, you get 5 wild resources and can ignore an invasion or a crisis, which can be extremely useful in Cycle 1. Honestly, I might even straight up say it's always better to take a catastrophe on your first invasion if it's even slightly inconvenient. For regular crisis cards, it also might be better to just take the punishment from the crisis instead of putting it on the crisis board, especially if it's a crisis you won't be able to address for a while. At certain times in the game, you'll be attacked by the Voidborn. These are the skirmishes. When you lose control of a sector, you lose all guilds and installations, so it can be brutal to spend multiple turns building up a sector just to lose it all. You should know how to manipulate the skirmish target. The hierarchy of determining where you get hit is where they will win, where the most fleet power is recalled, then a pure sector, then highest population, then the most guilds. Note that the most fleet power recalled and pure sector is prioritized over most guilds. So you can save a bunch of infrastructure just by moving some fleet power to a different sector, or moving a corruption from your home board to a sector to corrupt the population. So here's my take on the overall strategy of the game. I think most games follow this general arc of establishing your economic base, then get agendas and tech, then expand and score your agendas. Things to think about while playing: what's your faction good at, and how is the starting agenda shaping your scoring objectives? Think about available techs and how they mesh with your faction and your starting tech. How are you going to get fleet power out? Where is the game going on the spectrum of economy versus military? Your economy doesn't always have to look like establishing a bunch of guilds and increasing population, so understand all the different ways you can get resources. What resources are spent on your faction's preferred focus card? Get agendas fast when possible, and maximize your cycle scoring. Earlier agendas give you more direction on how you want to play your overall game. Be aware about immediate benefits from gaining tech and bonus actions from playing agendas. The tech itself might not be the most useful, but the immediate benefit could be exactly what you need for that turn. Be aware of your upkeep costs and manage trade tokens. Focus on addressing the crisis board, making sure to prioritize getting rid of military crises. Take catastrophes early on to scale and avoid invasions if needed. Think about the best time to tie your fleet power up in safe havens. And finally, play towards your faction's strengths. I know this is all kind of vague, but the game is really open, and every game is different based on the text available, the agendas, and the galactic events. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.